With only a 1% pick rate according to Behavior's own statistics, and one of the lowest kill rates in the killer cast across all MMR, this Singularity is one of the least played and least lethal killers ever. But why is this the case? And why is this killer so unpopular? Is it because he's just too complicated to play, or is there more behind his extremely low pick rate? Let's take a look at one of the most complex killers to ever be released in Dead by Daylight, and understand why this anniversary character fell into oblivion. This Singularity was revealed as part of the End Transmission chapter, officially made playable back in May 23rd of 2023 as part of the anniversary chapter. But let me tell you this, unlike with the twins, where I mentioned that their reception was not that great due to the theme of the chapter as well as the visuals being not that attractive for the average player, this was not the case with the Singularity. For the first time, we got a killer taken from the far future, something that we asked for a long time, a map based on an extraterrestrial planet, a survivor that is not from the present, and finally, another non-human. The Singularity charmed everyone with his text-to-speech trash-talking lines, as well as surprisingly brutal Mori, and the idea of playing as a robot with erratic movement and a weird body was extremely cool for many players. I also have to remind you that this was during the time that the community was in great discontent with the game. In December of 2022, we got the Forged in Fog chapter, which, despite visually being amazing, brought a lot of bugs and bad design choices into the game. And let's not even start talking about the impact Tools of Torment had on the game. End Transmission seemed to be the first step into a great future ahead. However, things weren't as golden for this character. Let's talk about Singularity. This Singularity's power is divided in two parts, camera control and teleportation. You can place biopods all over the map in order to stalk survivors with them, and once you do, a slipstream will shoot automatically towards them. You can shoot survivors that are slipstreamed to teleport behind them, entering an overclock mode that allows you to break stuff faster, as well as vault windows and instantly break pallets if you get stunned by them. Survivors that are together also infect each other with the slipstream, but they can deactivate the cameras and the slipstream with EMPs, which generate in 3D printers all over the map. On paper, this power sounds really terrifying for the state of the game he was released in, as both the Knight and the Skull Merchant had a dominant 3-genning playstyle that made the game miserable for survivors. So, a killer able to use cameras to hold places down would fit right in with this campy, not living generators playstyle that was so prevalent during this meta. But this was not the case. The Singularity, who has the most reason to camp and protect gens thanks to the static cameras, ended up being one of the most complex chase killers the game has ever seen, but also one of the most counterable killers in the game. The main reason as to why nobody plays Singularity is simple. Singularity is just complicated to play. But again, this doesn't make much sense when you take a look at it from the surface. Killers being complicated doesn't warrant them a low pick rate, as can be proven by killers like Hillbilly, the Nurse, or the Blight. But there are two massive differences that set these three characters aside from Singularity, making Singularity actually a one-of-a-kind killer. Singularity is extremely macro-centered yet easily counterable, and the gameplay is not as satisfying. Instead, it's clunky. Let's take a deeper dive into each point. The first issue that Singularity has is that he is one of the only characters that is macro-focused instead of micro-focused. With the previously mentioned characters, everything that matters for you is that you perform well in a chase. Find a survivor, hit them, down them. Depending on your killer power, you do this in a different way, but that is where most of the gameplay and skill expression comes from. So as a killer, if you miss an attack with these killers, most of the time it can be called a skill issue. With Singularity, on the other hand, you have to globally pressure the map at all times, set biopods near generators or 3D printers, constantly check them to see if any survivors are nearby, slipstream as many survivors as you can, all of these in order to get the chance to teleport to a survivor to chase them as a buffed M1 killer. And the worst part is that unlike with the other 3 difficult killers, Singularity's counterplay is built in on his own kit thanks to the EMPs, so if you get outplayed, it doesn't feel like it was your mistake. It feels like survivors are simply stomping on you due to the EMPs with nothing you can do besides reset and start again. You basically have to set up an entire game in your head only to achieve a lesser version of what the nurse can do with just one press of a button with no counter. And talking about pressing a button, if you're enjoying this video, consider pressing the like one. It's still faster than the time it would take you to slipstream, teleport, and hit a survivor with the Singularity. This type of playstyle, where you have to constantly be aware of what is happening in a match, only to get that progress delayed with just one press of a button for survivors, is not something that the vast majority of players will enjoy, especially the casual ones. His skill floor is higher than some other killers' skill ceiling, and in fact, when you compare him with other macro-intensive characters, you will see that all of them have automatic macro powers. With Sadako, you can just spam teleports in order to make survivors condemned. With Pinhead, the chain hunt is fully automatic. With Skull Merchant, again, you can just spam drones and do well, since survivors don't know how to counter it. But they do offer ways to show your skill expression. For example, by targeting specific TVs, you can try and prevent survivors from holding tapes. With Pinhead, learning the spawn mechanic of the box and playing around it makes you an entirely different killer. And let's not forget about the amazing Skull Merchant guide that is over an hour long. But you don't have to do any of that in order to perform well. You can simply ignore all of these aspects of their power, and the kill rate statistics prove this, because all those killers I mentioned are on the top of even absolute meta beasts like the Hillbilly, the Nurse, or the Blight. But with Singularity, you simply can't. Everything you do is manual. There is no way to automatically slipstream survivors, nor detect survivors with inactive cameras like Skull Merchant's drones, and this is indeed shown in the kill rates. He has the 4th lowest one in the game. And that's mainly due to the fact that not only is Singularity forced to interact with his macro aspect of his kit, the truth is that for the amount of effort you need to play him, you do not get rewarded as much as the other characters when you do. With Sadako, your final reward could be a condemnation kill. With Pinhead, you get massive slowdown and initial tracking. With Skull Merchant, you get haste, as well as either a free hit or deep wounds. And with any of the other killers in the game, the reward from your setup is usually a hit. But with Singularity, all you get is to teleport behind them with a temporal tier 3 Meyer state that doesn't give insta-down. And have you noticed how I am using a specific add-on and perk combination in this entire video's b-roll? That's because Singularity suffers from a huge problem that surprisingly not many people actually talk about, and that's the fact that he is just like the Knight, the Trapper, and the Shape, extremely add-on dependent. Soma's family photo is an add-on that makes it so that during your overclock, you get a 5% haze bonus speed at the cost of the overclock lasting 20% less duration. This add-on is the equivalent of Map of the Realm for the Knight, as without it, you will feel like your overclock boost is not that good, and if you combine it with Rapid Brutality, suddenly Singularity jumps from one average and extremely complex character to a very strong A-tier killing machine. And think how crazy that sounds when you consider that this add-on has a huge penalty that takes away 20% of your overclock duration, even while being very rare. Without this add-on, survivors can just hold W, pre-drop pallets to stun you or force you to break them and just keep running. And let me remind you that originally, Family Photo was an iridescent add-on that also had a 50% overclock duration penalty, and Singularity came out back when Mate for this was absolute peak in the survivor meta. Trying to catch a survivor after you teleport to them that moves 3% and even up to 10% faster in the endgame if paired with Hope is so hard that there was simply no point in playing Singularity without Family Photo. There is a reason why Rapid Brutality is one of his most used perks and the perk with the highest kill rate according to Nightlight with a 62%. It's proof that this killer can be a monster in the right hands with the correct build, which is Rapid Brutality combined with Family Photo. I have played a lot of Singularity games in order to get a feel again, and based on my own experience, the games with Soma's Family Photo have been significantly easier than those without this add-on, where it was significantly harder to even confirm a hit. If you haven't, try this build and you will see how strong he is. And I feel like this is a good moment to pivot into how easy it is to counter Singularity if you are a decent survivor. And in fact, out of all killers in the game, I would say that Singularity is the one that gets the most punished when survivors play in an altruistic way. It takes just one EMP to completely remove all slipstream survivors have, and you can do this through walls. The Singularity feels so punishing because it takes so much time to set up, slipstream everyone and get a hit only for a random survivor to come out of nowhere with an EMP and completely remove 2 infections with just one press of a button. It takes away from the agency of the killer as you can be playing flawlessly and survivors still can counter you with ease. Singularity falls into the same problem that Ghostface, Xenomorph and Dredge have, where their counterplay feels very frustrating to play against from the killer's perspective the moment survivors understand what they have to do. But here is the thing. With the Xenomorph, they have to interact with the flamethrowers, put them in strategic positions, because if they don't, Xenomorph can take the turrets away with its tail attack. With Ghostface, you can have some agency on how you move around the map to prevent survivors from spotting you, and they still have to make sure they know your location. But with Singularity, it's as easy as just picking up an EMP that automatically charges during the match and keeping it on you while you repair a generator. It doesn't take away from the survivor's time, it doesn't require any strategy whatsoever. Singularity was considered a weakish killer in the PTB, and the devs had to quickly nerf EMPs on the live release due to how powerful they were. This is not the only problem Singularity has in terms of agency. Let's not forget how map dependent this killer is. If you get an indoor map with him, most of the time it's game over, as you need a line of sight in order to slipstream survivors easily or to aim at them to teleport. The game and Midwich are not as bad since they do have open areas, but they have their own issue. A single EMP can break biopods through floors, and since those maps are small, you might have your biopods more broken than usual. And how about his clunkiness? I surprisingly don't see many people talking about this, but Singularity has a lot of issues with his kit. The amount of times I accidentally chose the wrong camera while in a chase, the disorientation that this causes, the constant sound glitches that are still present to this day where your power sounds constantly play outside of the cameras. How clunky the placements of the biopods are in itself, where you try to shoot a camera correctly only for it to not work, or the fact that it's easy to miss with Singularity and you might place a camera elsewhere, which potentially can break one of your biopods placed at the start. And the thing that most players will agree with is the inconsistent line of sight mechanic that the pods have, where a single leaf or tree branch can block your ability to slipstream a survivor trying to hide, resetting your progress to 0 again. And I understand that camping is bad, but they absolutely overtuned how punished Singularity is when you use a camera near a hook. The massive slowdown you get when you get off your cameras is absurd compared to any other anti-face cam feature they introduced. And also, the absurdly long slipstream infection time is just extremely frustrating to play with, because most of the times the game doesn't tell you how far you have to be in order to trigger this penalty. Imagine if Ghostface got punished like this and you had to stalk extremely slow anytime you stalk a survivor near a hook. His power is downright unusable in an endgame scenario where you try to secure a kill, because the moment you get into a biopod, you are just severely punished, and he is by far the killer that gets punished the most, to the point it's just frustrating. I mean, now that the resolve mechanic is in the game, what is the point of this anti-face cam feature? If Singularity chooses to stay near the hook inside a camera, either he gets to teleport somewhere else, or the camp survivor will activate the anti-camp mechanic either way, and you can still proxy camp and use your biopods if you just stand 10 meters away from the hook. So this mechanic doesn't really prevent camping. And besides, what is the danger of letting Singularity biopod a survivor or a rescuer off hook? Huntress can literally hold her hatchets with no penalty whatsoever and proxy camp. So why is Singularity so extremely punished when he can do at best what the Huntress does at worst? Notice how Singularity is also punished when hooking a survivor, as the slipstream effect is removed, similar to how survivors wake up once hooked by Freddy. Compare this to Wesker, as survivors still have the Ouroboros infection after a hook, which allows him to tunnel easier. So why is Singularity punished but Wesker gets to keep the infection? What this leads to is that most players that want to have a chance against strong teams will slug survivors, as downing them doesn't remove the slipstream, meaning that any survivor that tries to heal might get the slipstream infected on them, which can lead to a massive snowball that can decide the outcome of a match. As you can see, there are many issues with Singularity outside of the fact that he is just complicated to play. In short, Singularity is map dependent, add-on dependent, with a highly complex and engaging power that requires a lot of macro knowledge but doesn't reward you as much once you master it, and it gets punished very easily by survivors. This puts Singularity in a very weird spot. On one hand, he is designed to be extremely oppressive, almost matching the nurse's insane match pace thanks to the ability to start a chase in any part of the map. Yet, at the same time, his counterplay can lead to him ending up weak, powerless, just like the Trapper. Singularity is not a weak killer at all, but at the same time, why bother when you can just play any of the other killers in the game, which are significantly easier and require less brain meat? So, in conclusion, Singularity is just not beginner friendly, and it's not a killer made for everyone, as you have to really enjoy this playstyle in order to have fun playing as him. But does he need a rework, a massive buff, or something to make him more played? In my personal opinion, I would say no, he doesn't. Singularity falls into the same category as the twins does, as they both are niche killers that don't have many fans, but those that do enjoy them enjoy playing as these killers a lot because of how unique they are. And I think it's undeniable that Singularity is an extremely unique take on the camera check archetype in video games, and his design is just fantastic. A trash talking robot? Sign me up. Complex characters like Singularity exist in many games, and they all feel a niche for those players that want more and want to feel like they are playing 4-dimensional chess instead of press a button to injure. However, I do think he needs some touch-ups and quality of life changes in order to shine a little bit more, as I don't want to just make this video to say Singularity sucks and it is what it is. Just like the twins didn't need a rework and instead they got some touch-ups, I think Singularity would benefit from this exact thing too. Starting with what I think would impact him the most, I think a speed up power during overclock would greatly benefit Singularity in terms of strength. It's clear that Family Photo is by far his best add-on because it adds something to his kit that is lacking, and I am sure that add-on pick rates of behavior prove this. So, I think a decrease on the base duration of overclock and a haste bonus after teleporting would be great, just so Singularity doesn't depend on this add-on as much, with the nerf being there because I myself admit that he could end up overtuned if this is not implemented well. Regarding the map dependency part, I actually think that there isn't much that can be done, and it should stay that way. The charm of Dead by Daylight are the variables that happen during the matches, and I think it's impossible to make all killers play well on every single map without them breaking the fundamentals of the game like the nurse. So, Singularity being bad on indoor maps is just a thing that we have to deal with, just like stealth killers are bad in open maps. However, the collision needs to be improved dramatically, and this is something I think everyone can agree with. One of the things that make indoor maps bad is that the camera placement doesn't work in most parts due to their collision. Sometimes you need to take extra time in order to place a biopod, or they just don't let you place one where you want because the collision doesn't allow you to. Improving the collision of Dead by Daylight in general would help with Singularity on indoor maps and also help other killers by proxy like the Huntress, Boba or Xenomorph. The anti-camp mechanic needs to go. It's way too punishing and no other killer has this issue as he does. With the resolve mechanic, this punishment is completely redundant and only leads to frustrating gameplay from the killer side. At the very least, if they want to keep it for some reason, deactivate this mechanic in the endgame and whenever the survivor is in the dying animation. And finally, as a small quality of life change I am sure many will appreciate a lot, I would make it so that the teleport toggle is different from the biopod placement one. It's really frustrating to miss a shot and place a random biopod somewhere which forces you to waste time and break it, or continue the chase and eventually come back to break it again. If this is not possible, I think a way to remotely break biopods would also be quite nice for when you need to reposition your cameras without having to waste time visiting a part of the map that has nothing interesting on it. I mean, if Skull Merchant can recall her drones and Twins can recall Victor as well, why shouldn't Singularity? The only argument against this would be that Singularity can be really strong in the late game, but I personally see no problem with that, since if the biopods are indeed concentrated in an area, survivors can easily EMP them all. In terms of EMPs, this might be a hot take, but I think with all the previous changes, the devs don't have to change anything about them. They exist for a reason, and if they nerf them hard, we will have another Twins PTB case where the killer is absurdly strong. So, if you have a suggestion yourself, please leave it in the comments. I hope this video was informative enough to highlight the Singularity's flaws and design intricacies. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.